everybody to another episode of Conversations with Annie and Kate. Hello, Annie.
Hey, Kate, how are you doing?
And tonight, our guest is Kerry Chikarovski. Hi, Kerry.
Hi, Annie. Hi, Kate. Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm just going to do a bit of an introduction because Kerry Chikarovski was one of the women in leadership that I saw on the stage, world stage, as I was growing up. So she went to my old school. She's a lawyer, and she was a member of Parliament for the Liberal seat of Lane Cove and became the leader of the New South Wales Liberal Party. And after she left politics, she's a lobbyist, political commentator and ambassador for several charities and an all-round interesting woman. So welcome, Kerry.
And thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm overwhelmed.
So Kerry, did you know that you and Kate went to the same school?
No, I didn't. But let me say, it was a fabulous school when I was there. It's one of the reasons why I ended up doing the things that I did, and I'm sure it still is. Although, having said that, my daughter, she went until year 10, and then she decided she didn't want to go to a single-sex girls' schools anymore, having been in the States for 6 months at a co-ed high school. So she finished at St Andrews, but she loved it while she was there. But yeah, I think it was the lure of the boys that, or the co-ed, that attracted her to St Andrews.
There is something. There's a balance though about the co-ed schools for me. So I as my accent might belie, I'm British. I went through the state school system in the UK. So there's, other than obviously if you're going to a private school, then quite clearly you could choose whatever you want and whatever your money can pay for. But my parents couldn't afford that. And the idea of going to a school that didn't have boys and girls together would just be very foreign to me.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, given what's been going on recently, there's probably a lot of, good reasons to actually go to co-ed. But that's another discussion, and a much longer discussion for another day.
All right. So, Annie, do you want to ask one of our first icebreaker questions?
I will. So, Kerry, this is my favourite one. And it's, you could go back to your younger self, and you can choose whatever age that would be. If you could go back to your younger self and give some advice, what words of advice would you have?
Probably to be a little bit more open when I was in the leadership position, be prepared to admit that I wasn't coping as well as I needed to cope, not being the person who is always the one who has to fix things and therefore has to be stoic on all occasions. And that applied in the leadership role, but it's applied pretty well all my life. Because I'm the eldest of 4 girls, I kind of always thought it was my role to make sure everything was okay. So when my mum died, for example, I had to make sure my dad was okay. When I got divorced, I had to make sure my kids were okay. When I was in the leadership, I had to be okay without getting any help from anybody else, because that was what I did. I always was, the person who had to make things okay. And I think, in hindsight, the best advice I could give my younger self is admit when you need some help and go for it, because I never really did. And it was only later in life that I started to do that.
It's really similar advice that a lot of people seem to give. And I think women don't realise until we get older that we were so hard on ourselves when we were young.
Totally. I mean, and it's, the bit of advice I give lots of women when I speak to them is that, have more confidence in yourself. Believe you can do things. Don't believe because you haven't done it before, you shouldn't have a go at it now. I never had that problem, let me tell you. I was always very confident. I was always prepared to have a go. But yeah, I think, for a lot of women, and hopefully less so now than when I was growing up and when I was going through what I went through, because I think young women today, they strike me as being more confident these days.
It's interesting. Okay. I did some things with some young folks from a local high school, and everybody was saying that I was talking about the normative culture when you leave and it's sexist. Workplaces are sexist and stuff. They said, oh, no, we won't be like that. We're all very egalitarian. And I was like, oh, I'm not sure.
Well, I had that conversation in 1993. I was in New York and I met with what was then the largest business women's group in the States. And I said to them, how do you recruit members? And I said, do you get them when they're coming straight out of college? And they went, no, when they come straight out of college, they think that they own the world and the world will be completely fair to them. We usually get them about 7 or 8 years later. I went, yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm gonna ask my question is, what is the one tool that you always go to? And it could be anything. It could be a power tool. It could be a thinking tool. It could be anything.
Well, it's definitely not a power tool, and it's definitely not a cooking utensil, because I am well known for my inability to cook. So neither of those would qualify. I did think, should I say the vacuum cleaner? Because, you know, my house is, yeah, not too bad, but then I realized that's because I have help. So I can't give you any of those things. I suspect the one tool that I would go to, the one that I think that I use most often in my life, which is probably the same as a whole lot of other people now, is I'm a very big user of Google. I like to be completely informed when I'm discussing things. So I do a lot of Google searches, and I don't rely on Wikipedia.
That is a very good tool. I'm just going to go and get the noisy thing off my dog.
So Kate's just got a little Chihuahua puppy 2 weeks ago.
Oh, too cute.
He's adorable, but because he's so little, she has to put a little bell on his collar, because otherwise she might stand on him. So he's adorable.
That's sad.
He's very adorable.
And he's the smallest dog in the world, but his name is Maximus.
Oh my God. Well, Kate, you'd appreciate my daughter. She has 3 dogs. She and her family have 3 dogs. The first one is Gin. The second one was Tonic. So of course they had to get the third one, and it was called Andy. So they just call them Gin and Tonic.
I love that.
That is lovely.
I was wondering if they need another one and maybe call it Lime and Lemon.
Yeah, no, I've told them. No more dogs. I think they've got enough.
The guy I got this from has like 6 of them. It's hilarious. So that leads me to the question, what are we all drinking? I'm drinking a very nice Bordeaux.
Go, Kerry.
After you, Annie. I've got a gin and tonic.
What have you got floating in there though? They look like flowers.
They are, no. They're actually plastic ice cubes, because I used to put in those metal ones, you know, because I don't like to dilute my gin and tonics, and I kept smashing the glass on the with the metal ones. So I bought plastic ones. I told you I'm pretty incompetent in the kitchen. So I've got beautiful plastic ones. So they're plastic fruit, but they work very well. They keep it very cold.
I need to get me some of those.
And what are you drinking, Annie?
Can I follow-up question? I'm a gin and tonic girl as well, as is Kate. What gin is it? Well,
cheers to all of you. Cheers to both of you. And we better have a sip.
What brand of gin have you got?
This one's a Hendrix.
Classic choice.
Yeah,
and mine
classic.
is a Barossa Valley Cab Sav, not a Shiraz.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, there's a lot. Look, I must actually get into more of the Australian gins. So I've had one which I've run out of, which was from Joadja. That was delicious as well. But Hendrix was what I'm drinking at the moment.
I'm loving how gin is so fashionable now, and there's so many different kinds you can get. I'm really enjoying that.
Totally.
So Kerry, I wanted to ask you about when you got the leadership, because that wasn't a very common thing for a woman back in those days, was it? What year was it?
In 1996, I was the first female, 96 or 97, I can't remember now, 96 I think it was. Yeah, it was 96. I was the first female leader in New South Wales. First female leader of a political party in New South Wales. So it wasn't that common. We'd had a couple of deputies, but I was the first actual leader of a political party in this state.
And how did the men take that?
Well, it was the men's idea to give it to me. So it was the power brokers within the Liberal Party who decided that they'd have a go at having a woman. And it was all, look, you know, it's again another story for a much longer conversation, a much longer time. But it was a decision by the factions within the Liberal Party that they would approach me, and they did. They approached me to put my hand up for leader, and it was, you know, people think it was a really easy decision, but it wasn't. It was actually quite tough, because we only had just over 3 months to an election. So it was a big ask to go in and pretty well do much at all. Yeah. And, you know, it is a learning experience. I mean, I would have made a much better campaigner at the next election had I stayed on as leader than I did at the one where I actually went to the election. But that's because I would have had 3 years experience, 4 years experience.
Yeah, that's really quite interesting. And how do you think that that's really shaped the rest of your life, that experience? Has it shaped the rest of your life?
Oh, I am the first to say I'm incredibly grateful to the Liberal Party for giving me that experience, because it taught me a lot of things. Well, it taught me how to cope with losing, which I did quite spectacularly. But being leader gave me a lot of skills. It taught me how to work with people to, you know, get consensus, because I'm very big on consensus and groups. Yes, I want to make a decision. I want to be, you know, part of the decision-making process, but I didn't feel as if I had to impose my view on a whole lot of people. I became very good at persuading people to my view. And you were sitting in a shadow cabinet where you had the left wing of the Liberal Party on one side, all the way over to the right wing of the National Party. So getting a consensus from that group was was sometimes difficult, but it was a very good life skill to learn.
I'm not sure how you put those two.
So was it always your intention to go into politics, Kerry?
I wanted to be a politician since I was 13. I came back from the States. We lived in the States when I was younger, from the time I was 7 till I was 13. I was fortunate enough to meet Robert Kennedy, a couple of months before he was shot. Seriously impressed with that. As a 12-year-old, I think I would have been. I was incredibly impressed with him and his ability to move a crowd. And I just decided that I wanted a job where I could do things for people. And the thing about being a politician is that that's what you really do. You actually do things for people. As a local member, you do it on an individual or a small community basis. As a member of a government, as a member of a cabinet, you get the opportunity to do it for a lot more people. So, yep, wanted to do it from the time I was 13.
Interesting.
Do you think that many people understand what the job of a member of parliament is?
Oh, I don't think many people have any idea. And I say this as someone who gets the opportunity to talk to a lot of people. I don't think anybody understands how hard members of parliament work. And I'm not being self-gratifying there by saying, oh, I worked really hard and, therefore people should appreciate me. It is, and the higher up you go, the more consuming it is. I mean, I, as the leader of the opposition, used to get up at 5:30 in the morning and finish at 11 o'clock at night. And I had to manage my work, which was my work as a politician. I had to manage my local constituency work as the local member. I had to manage my family, spending time with my family. And I had to try and find some time for myself. I actually took up walking when I was leader, because I just needed that, quiet time just to myself, have an hour a day, because you don't get a lot of that in politics.
When did you do that? Like at 4:30?
I used to be up at, because I used to have to be on the phone at 5:30. So what I would do is I would go 5:30 to 6. I would do all the radio stuff, and then I'd go out for 45 minutes and come back and get changed and go to the office, get the kids, make sure the kids were ready for school, get them up at about, 7 o'clock, make sure they had lunches, and then, go to the office.
That is a huge day.
And sort of the day finish.
About 11 o'clock at night.
That's absurd. How is that even possible?
It was crazy. And but I was really lucky. I got to sleep in on Sundays. I didn't have to get out of bed on Sundays until about 7:30. That was my big sleep in.
Being a federal politician, because otherwise you're in Canberra too. And
so the decision to actually be in the state was one I took with my then husband. He married me knowing that I wanted to be a politician. So we sat down and talked about what that would look like when I was getting to the stage where I really wanted to be serious about it. And we decided federal or state because I did have young kids, and he thought it was important that I tried to keep some level of normality in their life. So I would be there in the morning. I would try and get home before they went to bed, but often that would be go home and then go out again. So we decided state for that reason, that I could actually be around, upper or lower. Lower, of course, because I wanted to be leader. So, yeah.
So you've really thought about that really seriously, about not just wanting to be a politician, but wanting to be in leadership.
Oh, yeah, totally. No, I mean, I don't think there are too many people who go into Parliament who have, as we say, don't have the leadership baton in their backpack. Everybody thinks they can do it. Not everybody gets the opportunity, obviously, but I think, lots of people will get the opportunity to be ministers, and ministers are also important in the process, very important in the process. Look at Brad Hazard in the last 12 months, 15 months. I think that man has worked his absolute, excuse my French, arse off, because, he's been working, again, ridiculous hours to try and get us through COVID, as has the Premier. So, I think people who go into Parliament have ambitions to at least have some sort of leadership role, whether it's the ultimate leader or be, a minister or parliamentary secretary, something like that.
That's really interesting. So what did you do with yourself when you finished doing that?
When I left? Well, that was a pretty hard decision to leave because, as I said, I'd wanted to do it for such a long time. I was there for 12 years. I'd lost the leadership 12 months before I left. My children at that stage wanted me to walk out the day I lost the leadership, and I wouldn't do that. I said, no, I can't do that to the Liberal Party, and I don't believe in doing that to my electorate because, I don't think it's fair to put them to a by-election. But when the election was coming around, I literally went and sat on the balcony at a house near a beach to think about whether I would stay or not. And it was a very deliberate decision on my part to leave. Influenced by a number of things, but probably because my kids were over it. They were 7 and 5 when I went in. They were 19 and 17 when I left. My daughter in particular had enough of being, are you that woman's daughter? Because when you're Chikarovski, it's a little hard to hide. So I think deliberately thinking about leaving and going through that process of working out whether I should stay or go made it easier to go, but I had to go and find something which I would be passionate about, as passionate as I was about politics. So I've ended up in running my own business. I run a government relations firm, but that's not where, and I do, look, to be fair to myself, I do that pretty well. I think I've got very happy clients, but I love doing the things that I do with the charities that I work with. I love being involved with rugby, and particularly the women's rugby. All those things are what drives me and I'm passionate about now.
And did that just all sort of fall into naturally, or did you also have a plan for that as well, kind of going, right, I'm going to do my business, I'm going to have this sort of portfolio of other things that are going to keep me happy, or was it just all naturally fell into place? Yeah,
no, the business was certainly not a plan. What happened was after I left, people kept on approaching me and saying, look, could you help me with, and it was particularly in New South Wales with the public service, because a lot of people don't understand how bureaucrats think or work. So after about the third or fourth time that I'd helped someone, and they were friends, they were just people I knew, and one of the guys said to me, now what do I owe you? And I went, oh, no, you don't have to pay me now. I said, this is what I do. And he said, no, Kerry, you did that when you were a member of Parliament. Now you're doing it as a private citizen, so you should be charging a fee. And I kind of scratched my head and thought, oh, maybe there's a business in this. And that's the least organised and least planned in anything in my entire life. And it's turned out to be a very good business. And the other things people have approached me to do, and I've really enjoyed them. And I'm selective about what I choose to do in terms of charity boards and other small boards, because I have to really be passionate about what the project is or what the aim of that charity is. So I've been approached to do a lot of things, and I pick and choose. And as I said, I've done about half a dozen that I'm really proud of.
And rugby.
And rugby is a particular one. I got involved in, I've always been a huge rugby fan, and I attribute that to the fact that, as I said, there's 4 girls, so I've got 3 younger sisters. So there was never a situation in my house where it was, the boys go to the footy with their father, because the girls went to the footy with their father, and more particularly in my case, the mother, because my mother loved her sport. So I'd always been a big fan of rugby. And then what happened was Nick Farr-Jones, who is World Cup winning Australian captain, asked me to get involved with the women's rugby. And from there, I got involved with New South Wales Community Rugby, and now I sit on the Waratahs board. So it's been a big part of my life. And in fact, I'm very excited because I'm actually going internationally on a flight on Friday, and I'm going to New Zealand to watch the Waratahs play the Blues. And I'm so excited about the fact that I'm actually getting on a plane, and I have to go and dig out my passport. I'm hoping I can find it. Oh, actually, I better do that tonight in case I can't. I'll have to get expedited one.
No, definitely do it tonight. Make sure you know where it is.
Yes.
I had to do an emergency back to London in September last year, and I can't tell you how weird it was going through Sydney Airport, and there was just everything was closed, all the duty free, none of the shops are open. About 3 or 4 of the cafes were open, and you know the departures board is just usually jam packed with flights.
Yep.
Just 6 flights. That was it.
Yeah. No, well,
very odd.
I'll report back what it's like now with a few more flights on the schedule. But yeah, I'm very excited to be jumping on a plane. And I've been doing a bit of domestic flying, which has been good for work and again for Waratahs. But to actually produce a passport, oh my God, it's been 15 months.
I've not been at home for this long since I was a teenager. Crazy.
Yes, I know, nuts.
But I'm really interested in how you adjusted to you've started a new business, you've got all these other interests, and you're now not taking care of all your constituents. You know, how did you deal with that? Because you said you're kind of a bit caregiver.
Yeah. So when I lost the leadership, that was pretty traumatic because I'd gone from having my diary organised in 15-minute increments to having absolutely nothing in it. And that, for me, was a real shock because I had been used to being busy. I had been used to being organised. I'd been used to doing all the things which, you know, I felt were about contributing back to the community. So the first 12 months, or the 12 months after losing the leadership, I had to reconnect, spend a lot more time in my community, which was terrific, and I got used to that. But I also got very good at managing my own personal time better. So I was able to give more time to myself and to my family, which was a good thing. So that kind of transitioned me away from the hectic, 16-hour days. So I kind of transitioned away from that. But then what happened was when I left, I literally was looking around, beyond the job, beyond the business, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. Really wasn't sure, because you're right. I mean, I had spent all this time working with people, trying to make people's lives better. So I was lucky in that, or no, lucky. Women always say they're lucky, and they should never say that. I was asked to go on the board of the Humpty Dumpty Foundation, which was the first charity board that I went on, because I'd had a relationship with the organisation when I was a member of Parliament, because they were providing equipment for the children's ward at North Shore Hospital. So I think I got involved in that, and from there I realised that I could do a lot of good. I mean, I knew a lot of people. I had a lot of experience which would be useful to other organisations. And if I had a day job which paid me, then I could actually do all these things, which was what I wanted to do them because they were the passion. They were the things that I really wanted to do. So that helped. That certainly helped. I also say the other thing was that once I left Parliament, I had a little bit more time to make sure I brought my children up and got them to adulthood safely. People always say, what's your greatest achievement? I say getting two kids to adulthood, successfully. Well, relatively successfully.
Oh, that's always a good achievement, because
I think so.
Many go off the rails because they don't get the love and affection that they need.
That's true.
And Kerry, you talked, right at the beginning of the chat, you talked a little bit about how being a leader of the Liberal Party also gave you that opportunity to deal with loss.
Yep.
It's not something we talk about very often, is it? This concept of it's okay to fail at things and to learn from it. And you lost quite publicly, which is also going to be an extra level.
Very, very publicly.
So
Sorry.
What? If you no, that's perfectly true. I started a startup. It was on the front page of the Financial Review, and within 6 months, it completely crumbled, and I had to publicly apologise to everybody that had invested. And
yep.
It's not pleasant. So,
no.
What words of advice do you have for women who are taking on perhaps those first leadership roles like you did, and feeling like they're not just doing it themselves? It's almost like you're stepping into a leadership role that effectively earns the right for other women to get into it too.
So I always say to people, and every self-help book you've ever read will say the same thing, is that you cannot fear failure. There's a very corny card that you see in card shops all the time, which says, "Aim for the stars, you'll at least land on the moon." And that's, kind of incredibly true, because I obviously, yep, you were right. I wanted to be premier and I didn't get there, but I ended up as opposition leader, female opposition leader. Never happened before in New South Wales. So that was an achievement which I can quite rightly, I think, be proud of. I think, though, I say to people, if you don't have a go, you will never know. And I'll give you the example. The best example for me, personally, was when they came in and challenged me for the leadership. I had the gang of, affectionately called the Gang of Five. No, hold on, I'm not bitter and twisted. But the Gang of Five, they came in to see me. And these were 5 of my colleagues. And they came in and they gave me 3 reasons why I should resign the leadership and not take it to a vote. And the first was that we weren't doing that well in the polling, which was completely untrue. And yep, I wasn't doing as well as Bob Carr, no doubt about it. But on the 2-party preferred, we were actually either neck and neck or marginally ahead. So that was not true. The second one was that the corporate world weren't providing enough funding towards the Liberal Party. And as I was the only one who knew what the funding was, because I spoke to the state director on a weekly basis about it, I knew that was also untrue. But the third one, and this is the killer one, the third one was how just imagine how embarrassed you're going to be when you don't win the vote. At which stage I told them, and I wrote a book, and in my book I told them, get out of my office. And I put it that way in the book because I knew my mother would read it. But what I actually said was, fuck off out of here now. I couldn't put that in the book. She would have been very upset that I swore. But that's what I did. But I went home that night and I remember lying in bed and staring at the ceiling going, well, are they right? Am I going to be so embarrassed? Are the kids going to be so embarrassed if I lose? And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I went, no. What would really destroy me would be if I didn't have a go and then I never knew whether I could have won.
Yeah.
Better to have actually done it and lose by 1 vote, not that I'm bitter and twisted, lose by 1 vote, than not to have tried at all. Because I can tell you now, 20 years later, pretty well, I would have been lying in bed now going, why the hell didn't I have that go? So. Oh my gosh,
it's one of my dad's favourite sayings is no what ifs. Because that will
totally.
That would just gnaw away at you.
Yeah, totally. Which is why I had to go and lost by 1.
Well, for me growing up and seeing you on the TV and stuff, it gave me the idea that women could be in these positions of power. And, it was quite important, because you didn't see women in roles like that in the 90s.
Oh, absolutely right. And I mean, that's one of the other reasons why I was so reluctant to seek help, because to be honest, there was no one I could go and talk to because there was nobody else who was having my experience, and I didn't feel comfortable talking to the boys because, well, they were boys and they did things differently. So yeah, you're right, it was. And I mean, to be fair though, that there were a lot of women, a lot of business women who are in the same position. So what I think is better now than was when I was there is that there are now people like me who've been there, done that, who are more than happy to mentor, to talk to encourage both younger women. I do it for both younger women and younger men, to be honest. But to have someone, as I keep saying to some of my friends in politics, you can talk to me about anything. And I do that for people on both sides because I have no agenda. My only agenda is to help you be successful. And I believe that's important from both sides of the house, because I think we need good quality people arguing on both sides of the house. So, yeah. But it was hard because I couldn't actually find anyone to do that with.
I was going to ask you on that sides piece, and how do we get great people, sort of coming into politics? So I work in technology. I meet incredible badass people creating new businesses around the world every day. It's a joy. It's an absolute joy. And I keep thinking every now and again, why can't we get some of these people to become politicians, to become, sort of leaders of parties? And I'm sure there's some obvious stuff around the notion of politics has now perhaps become a series of sound bites and 3-year terms and you get bugger all done. But, you know, how do we get, you know, people who are, you know, in their 20s and 30s thinking, I want to be a politician? How do we get them?
Well, I think it's the same pretty well, you know, when I was there. You need people of passion. You need people, and it's, you know, people think that politicians are there because of the power and, you know, the big white car and the ministerial title. But what people who go into politics pretty well have in common is wanting to actually make a difference. Now, I would think that people in the tech industries who are, you know, out there at the forefront of change in terms of how our lives are being lived would be similar in their ambitions. So maybe what we need them to do is go off and make their squillion fortunes, you know, get all their dollars whacked away, and then they can think about putting some, you know, back into the community by putting back in and going and being politicians, putting up their hands and saying, look, I've got all this expertise and experience and passion, and let's do it for a broader community and a younger community maybe, but let's do it in a way in which I as an individual can help the greater good, not just me and just not my bottom line on my company.
But I mean, part of the thing with the startup folks is how often do they get to have a conversation with somebody like yourself who can tell them this and talk about their experience and that you can help people? Because, I mean, pretty much everybody I know doesn't think well of politicians. I know.
Yeah, no, that's fair call. When I'm just on that point, when I first got elected, I'll never forget it. You know how they do those surveys of professions? So when I remember ringing my mother saying, they've just put that annual survey out, Mum. I'm not sure that I picked the right job. And she said, why? And she said, because politicians came third last. The only people we beat were used car salesmen and drug dealers. And I reckon today people probably trust their drug dealer more than they trust the politicians.
That's an interesting conundrum.
Too funny.
I mean, some politicians have decided to go from, you know, a state or a federal level to go to local government. That never occurred to you?
Oh, good God, no. Oh, good God, no. My father was in local government. I used to say he had rocks in his head. No, thank you. I have a very strong view that there's nothing as X as an X. I never would never tell the Liberal Party what to do. I would never tell the leader what to do. I certainly offer advice and encouragement where I think it's appropriate. But yeah, I don't feel the need to go in, particularly into the public arena, and tell anybody in the Liberal Party, you know, that they're doing a bad job or what they should be doing better.
So what do you think about some of these other former leaders who are making very public statements?
Oh, are we referring to Malcolm Turnbull here, maybe?
Yeah, totally.
Tony.
Yeah, but I've got to say, in more recent times, Malcolm has been far more vocal than Tony. And look, to be honest, I don't want to comment on personalities, but let me just say, as a general view, I do think, as I said earlier, I was given opportunities that no other woman had been given. Very few people get the opportunity to be Prime Minister of this country. That only happens because of the party to which they belong that elects them leader and then supports them into that role. And my very, very, very strong belief is that whoever gets there should be grateful for that opportunity and shouldn't be thinking that it's their business to tear the party down. Can that be as generic as that?
Yeah,
I think that's beautifully put, Kerry. Beautifully put. Now, I'm going to jump topics slightly because you've spoken about your mum sort of at least 5 or 6 times in this short brief conversation. Did she sort of have a huge influence on who you are as a human being, or is it something that as you keep walking through life you still kind of hear her voice in your head, or comments that she's given you over life that still stuck with you?
Well, as I said, I'm the eldest of 4 girls, and I always say that my mother and father were the first and best feminists I ever knew. Because you grow up in a household of all girls, there is nothing about boys do this, girls do this. It was all, girls can do anything. And in my mother's case in particular, what had happened was her father My grandfather had died when my grandmother was probably in her early 40s or something like that. And so she had to look after herself. My grandmother really had to look after herself in a time when women were not expected to work. So she worked pretty well all her life. And in fact, to be fair, they owned pubs and my grandmother ran the pub much more so than my grandfather. So my mother had a very strong view that she wanted her girls to be in a position to look after themselves. So she encouraged us to, so, you know, I said I wanted to be a politician, but I was a lawyer before that. So she encouraged all of us to find something where if push came to shove, and, you know, this is 60s, 70s, where women were still expected to kind of get married and produce children, and that was about the only thing they did. She was very much of the view that we had to be in a position to be able to support ourselves, provide for ourselves, and make sure that if we ended up having children, that we could provide for them as well. So, yeah, she encouraged that attitude in me and never blinked. Never blinked when I told her I was wanted to be a politician. She was the first person, you know, who I spoke to. My dad and her were the two people I spoke to as soon as I got pre-selected. She was the person handing out how to votes for me. She was the person who was making cups of tea when I was out, you know, doing all the campaigning. She was the person, to be fair, who ended up doing tuck shop for me because I was too busy to do tuck shop and the kids wanted tuck shop. And I was always the mother with the best cake at the cake stall because my mother made
it. Well, you have confessed your lack of ability in the kitchen, so I'm fairly certain most of your other friends probably would have figured that out as well.
I think they did. And the kids certainly would have told them.
And so do you have any last words, because we're almost at time now,
Sure.
that you want to share with other women to guide them or give them some ideas?
Well, two things. I think people nowadays in particular are more inclined to think about getting mentors. And I think find someone who you trust, someone who you can download to. I mean, you can have that. Oh, I'm sorry, I nearly knocked over my gin and tonic. Who you can download to when you do have a bad day, or you don't know what to do, or you don't know what the next step is. So find someone, and mentor is probably too strong a word, but just find someone who you can have those conversations with, because I really think that's really important. I think that's really important because, you know, you think about it, and I used to always joke about it. The blokes forever did that in the pub. Mm-hmm. They'd be at Friday afternoon drinks. Well, you know, mum had gone home to look after the kids, but they'd be at Friday afternoon drinks. And whilst they wouldn't download their emotional baggage, because they don't do that, boys, in most instances, but they would talk about the shit time they'd had at the office, you know, and the guy who was their boss, who was not, you know, who they thought was a dickhead and wasn't actually appreciating how good they were. So they were doing that forever. I don't think women do that or have had the opportunity to do that. So find someone who you can do that with. That's the first thing. And the second thing is be brave. Seriously, be brave. Yep, I failed, but I learned from that. But as I said earlier, unless you try, you're never, ever going to know. And I remember talking to a group of public service women on one occasion, and they were all hesitant to go from the senior level of the public service into the senior executive service because they were, you know, public service was in grades, and they wouldn't put up their hand for SES positions. And, you know, I said to them, look, you know, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that if the job says I need a degree, then I probably need 2. If the job says that I need 5 years experience, I probably need 10. I said, you're all thinking, you're not thinking like a bloke. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, if I go to an interview panel, I won't know what to do. And if I don't get the job, then I obviously didn't know what to do. I wasn't good enough. I said, think like a bloke. If you go to an interview as a bloke and you walk in and they walk out and you don't get the job, most blokes will tell you the panel got it wrong. Not that you were bad, but the panel got it wrong. So you need to be brave, and you need to be able to, and you need to be able to cope with not getting it, but learn from everything you do. I say to people, you know, when you go for job interviews, work out why you didn't get it, and next time you go, address that. But, you know, not going, you're never going to, you never know, what is that thing? You never know unless you go, or whatever the advertising campaign was. Same thing. Unless you have a go, you'll never know.
And that is a fine note to end on. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Kerry. Thanks, Annie. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.